Doctors declared the vampire king's baby dead. Then a poor girl touched him. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The room was silent in a way that felt unnatural. Inside the royal medical chamber of the Voss estate, the most powerful healers in the vampire world stood around a small bed covered in white linen. Their expressions were grim and heavy. On the bed lay the infant prince, Adrian Voss, the only child of vampire king Lucian Voss. The baby was motionless. The machines around the bed had gone still moments ago. No sound of a heartbeat echoed through the chamber anymore. A tall vampire doctor slowly lowered his hands and stepped back. His voice was quiet but final. The prince has no heartbeat. He has no breath. The child is gone. Around the room, several attendants lowered their heads. One healer wiped her eyes. Even for creatures who had lived for centuries, this moment carried a terrible weight. The heir of the Voss bloodline had been declared dead. One of the guards standing near the doorway swallowed hard and spoke in a tense whisper. Has the king been told? The doctor nodded once. He is on his way. No one spoke after that. The silence deepened as if the entire mansion was holding its breath. The white curtains around the bed moved gently from the air of the ventilation system. Outside the tall windows, a cold winter rain fell across the dark hills of northern Vermont. In the hallway beyond the chamber doors, hurried footsteps approached. Servants moved aside quickly as a young woman rushed down the long corridor, carrying a cardboard bakery box. Her jacket was thin, and her shoes were damp from the rain outside. Her name was Emily Carter, a 23-year-old delivery worker who had been sent to bring fresh bread to the estate kitchens. She had never been inside the main mansion before. The place felt more like a museum than a house. Marble floors stretched across wide hallways, and portraits of pale, aristocratic figures watched from the walls. Emily followed the directions given by a nervous kitchen assistant who had rushed past her moments earlier. Just leave the bread in the medical wing. The staff is busy tonight. Emily reached the tall, double doors and hesitated. The hallway was strangely quiet. She gently pushed the door open, expecting to see a few nurses or servants. Instead, she stepped into a room filled with people dressed in dark formal coats. The air felt cold enough to make her skin prickle. No one noticed her at first. All eyes were fixed on the small bed in the center of the chamber. Emily took a cautious step forward. She saw the tiny infant lying on the sheets. The baby looked pale and terribly still. A strange sadness moved through her chest. She had no idea who the child was, but something about the sight made her heart ache. One of the doctors slowly lifted a white cloth. He prepared to place it over the infant prince. Emily spoke before she could stop herself. Wait. Her voice was soft, but it echoed across the silent chamber. Every head turned toward her at once. Several pairs of glowing eyes stared at the unexpected human standing in the doorway. The doctor frowned in confusion. Miss, this is not a place for visitors. Please step outside. But Emily was already walking forward. She did not know why. She did not know what she was doing. Something deep inside her told her not to look away from the child. She reached the bedside and looked down at the infant. His small hand rested near the edge of the blanket. Without thinking, Emily gently touched the baby fingers with her own. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sharp sound cut through the silence. A single electronic beep came from the monitor beside the bed. The doctor froze. Another beep followed. Then another. The machine screen flickered back to life as a thin green line jumped across the display. Heartbeat detected. The doctor stared at the monitor in disbelief. Around the room, several vampires stepped backward in shock. On the bed, the infant prince took a faint breath. And across the chamber, every pair of ancient eyes slowly turned toward the poor human girl who was still holding the baby hand. The sharp beeping from the heart monitor echoed across the chamber again. Every person in the room stood frozen as the thin green line continued to rise and fall across the screen. The doctor who had declared the infant prince dead stared at the monitor as if it had betrayed him. His pale fingers trembled slightly as he leaned closer to the machine. The heartbeat was real, weak but steady. The impossible had happened. Across the bed, Emily Carter was still holding the tiny hand of the baby without realizing it. She had not moved since the machine began to sound again. Her mind struggled to understand what was happening around her. The room felt colder than before, and dozens of eyes were now fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. One of the healers spoke in a shaken whisper. "Check the pulse again." The doctor quickly placed 2 fingers against the infant wrist. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "There's a pulse. It is faint, but it is there." Another doctor rushed to the opposite side of the bed and examined the infant breathing. The baby chest rose slowly and then fell again. A soft breath escaped the tiny lips. Several attendants gasped quietly. One of the guards near the wall stepped backward as if he had seen a ghost. The prince was alive again. Emily felt a sudden wave of panic. She slowly tried to pull her hand away from the baby, afraid that she had done something wrong. The moment her fingers lifted from the child's skin, the sound of the monitor changed. The steady rhythm weakened instantly. The green line dropped lower across the screen. The doctor's eyes widened with alarm. "Wait, do not move your hand." Emily froze in place. Her eyes moved nervously between the doctor's and the strange machine beside the bed. "I am sorry. I did not mean to interrupt. I was only delivering bread to the kitchen." The doctor ignored her explanation. His attention was locked on the monitor display. "Touch him again." Slowly, Emily hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the baby hand for a moment before she gently placed them back against the tiny skin. Immediately, the monitor responded. The weak heartbeat returned. The thin green line climbed higher on the screen. The doctor inhaled sharply. "It is responding to her contact." Another healer shook her head. In disbelief. "That is not possible. No human medical technique works that way." Across the chamber, the tall double doors suddenly opened with a deep echo that silenced the entire room. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as a powerful presence entered the medical wing. Every vampire in the chamber turned toward the doorway and bowed their heads at once. Vampire King Lucian Voss stepped into the room. He was tall and pale, with dark hair and eyes that carried the weight of centuries. His black coat moved softly behind him as he walked forward with controlled calm. The king's gaze moved slowly across the chamber until it landed on the small bed in the center of the room. For a moment, his expression remained unreadable. Then he spoke in a low voice that carried absolute authority. "Explain." The head doctor stepped forward quickly and bowed. "Your Majesty, the prince lost all signs of life several minutes ago. We attempted every healing method available, but there was no response." The king's eyes darkened slightly. "Continue." The doctor glanced toward Emily with visible confusion. Then this human girl touched the prince. The heartbeat returned immediately. The king's attention shifted toward Emily Carter for the first time. His ancient eyes studied her carefully. Emily felt the weight of that gaze like a physical force. She lowered her head nervously, still holding the infant hand without thinking. The doctor continued speaking. "When she removes her hand, the heartbeat weakens again. When she touches him, the heartbeat strengthens." The king slowly approached the bedside. Every step across the marble floor echoed through the silent chamber. When he reached the bed, he looked down at his infant son. The baby chest rose again in a small, fragile breath. For the first time, a flicker of emotion appeared in the king's expression. Then he turned toward Emily. His voice remained calm, but carried a quiet command that filled the room. "Do not move your hand." The baby prince's fingers curled weakly around Emily's finger as if he recognized her presence. The doctor stared at the monitor again and spoke in a stunned whisper. "The prince's heart is stabilizing. It is happening only while she is touching him." The entire room remained frozen as the truth slowly settled over the ancient vampires gathered there. The life of the vampire king only child now depended on the trembling hand of a poor human girl who had walked into the mansion by accident. The chamber remained completely silent after the doctor's words. The steady rhythm of the monitor was now the only sound filling the room. Every pair of ancient eyes remained locked on the fragile connection between the infant prince and the human girl standing beside the bed. Emily Carter felt as if the entire weight of the mansion had fallen onto her shoulders. She barely dared to breathe. The tiny fingers of Prince Adrian Voss were still curled around her own. His grip was weak, but unmistakably alive. Emily swallowed nervously and spoke in a quiet voice that trembled slightly. "Your Majesty, I do not understand what is happening. I was only delivering bread to the kitchen. I did not mean to disturb anything." Vampire King Lucian Voss did not respond immediately. His eyes remained on his son for several long seconds. The small rise and fall of the infant chest seemed to hold his full attention. Finally, the king lifted his gaze and looked directly at Emily. The intensity of that stare made her heart pound against her ribs. His voice was calm, but carried the authority of someone who had ruled for centuries. "What is your name?" Emily forced herself to answer. "Emily Carter, Your Majesty. I work for a bakery in the town down the hill." The king studied her carefully. His expression did not reveal whether he believed her or not. The head doctor stepped forward again with a troubled look on his face. "Your Majesty, we have repeated the examination several times. The prince's heartbeat becomes unstable every time she stops touching him. But when she restores contact, the heartbeat strengthens again." The doctor gestured toward the monitor screen where the thin green line continued to rise and fall with quiet consistency. It is as if her presence is stabilizing his life functions. A female healer shook her head slowly. "I have never seen anything like this in all my years of practice. No spell or medicine behaves this way." Another physician leaned closer to the prince and listened carefully to the breathing. "The child lungs are still weak, but they are working. Without the girl contact, the heartbeat fades again." The room grew tense with uncertainty. One of the elder vampires, standing near the back of the chamber, spoke with clear suspicion in his voice. "Your Majesty, we should be cautious. Humans are unpredictable creatures. It is possible this is some kind of trick or hidden magic." Several other nobles murmured quietly in agreement. Emily felt fear twist in her stomach. She shook her head quickly. "I swear I did not do anything. I did not know any magic. I only touched his hand because he looked so small and cold." The king slowly raised one hand. The entire room fell silent at once. His voice remained controlled, but carried quiet steel. "No one will accuse her without proof." The elder vampire bowed his head slightly, but did not look convinced. Lucian Voss turned back toward the bed and carefully examined his son. The infant face still looked pale, but there was now a faint hint of color returning to the cheeks. The small chest continued to rise and fall in gentle breaths. The king's expression shifted very slightly. Anyone who knew him well would have recognized the emotion behind that still face. "Hope." The head doctor cleared his throat carefully. "Your Majesty, if we remove the girl, now the prince's condition may collapse again. For the moment, she appears to be the only factor keeping his heartbeat stable." The king's eyes returned to Emily once more. She stood stiffly beside the bed, afraid to move even a single inch. Rainwater still clung to the sleeves of her thin jacket from the storm outside. She looked entirely out of place among the ancient vampires gathered around her. Yet the life of the heir to their entire bloodline now rested beneath her fingertips. Lucian Voss spoke again, his tone quiet but absolute. "Then she will remain exactly where she is." Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to object openly. The king continued, "Until we understand why my son responds to her presence, no one will remove her from this room." The head doctor nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Emily looked up at the king with uncertainty in her eyes. "Your Majesty, I should call my manager. They will wonder why the bread delivery never arrived." For a brief moment, the king's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That will be handled. For now, your only task is to keep holding my son's hand." Emily looked down at the tiny infant again. Prince Adrian's fingers tightened slightly around her own as if he could sense her attention. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. And slowly, every vampire in the chamber began to realize a truth none of them could have imagined earlier that night. The future of the Voss bloodline now depended on the quiet presence of a poor bakery delivery girl who had never even known vampires were real until this moment. The quiet rhythm of the monitor continued to echo through the medical chamber as the rain outside the tall windows grew heavier. Emily Carter had not moved from her place beside the bed. Her fingers were still wrapped carefully around the tiny hand of Prince Adrian Voss. The infant chest rose slowly and fell again with fragile breaths. Every doctor and healer in the room watched the monitor with complete concentration. The thin green line on the screen continued to move in steady waves that proved the prince was still alive. The head physician adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the equipment. His voice carried both relief and confusion. The prince's heart rate is stabilizing. It is still weaker than normal for a vampire child, but it is no longer failing. Another healer studied a glowing tablet that displayed the infant vital signs. This should not be possible. The prince had no measurable heartbeat earlier. We confirmed it several times. The older physician nodded slowly. That is correct. For several minutes, the prince's body showed no response to any medical treatment or healing technique. The moment the girl touched him, the heart activity returned. Emily listened nervously as the doctor spoke around her. She still felt completely out of place in a large marble chamber filled with elegant equipment and ancient vampires dressed in dark coats. She had only meant to deliver bread to the kitchen. Now, the life of a royal child depended on her hand remaining exactly where it was. Across the room, several vampire nobles whispered quietly among themselves. One of them spoke with concern. "Your Majesty, this situation raises many questions. Humans have no natural ability to influence vampire physiology." Another noble replied in a low voice. "Perhaps the girl carries some hidden bloodline or rare condition. Or perhaps something in the child senses her presence." Vampire King Lucian Voss listened to every word without interrupting. He stood beside the bed with his arms folded behind his back. His tall figure seemed almost motionless as he watched the small rise and fall of his son breathing. Finally, he turned toward the physicians. "Explain everything you know about the prince's condition." The head doctor bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, Prince Adrian fell ill earlier this evening. His heartbeat slowed rapidly and then stopped responding to all healing methods. We used blood stimulation techniques, restorative spells, and advanced medical equipment. None of them restored his vital signs." The doctor gestured carefully toward Emily's hand resting on the infant fingers. But the moment this girl touched the prince's skin, the heart activity resumed. "We do not yet understand why." The king's voice remained calm but serious. "Is it possible the prince's body is reacting to her energy or her blood chemistry?" The physicians exchanged uncertain glances. One healer answered cautiously. "It is difficult to say. Vampire children are extremely sensitive during early development. Sometimes rare reactions occur when they encounter unfamiliar biological signals." Another doctor added quietly. "However, the strength of the reaction we are seeing now is unlike anything recorded in our medical archives." The king looked again toward Emily Carter. She stood silently beside the bed, afraid to even shift her weight on the marble floor. Her fingers had grown slightly numb from holding the infant hand for so long, but she did not dare move them. Lucian Voss spoke to her again. "Emily Carter, do you feel anything unusual while touching my son?" Emily hesitated before answering. "I only feel that his hand is very small and very cold. But when I hold it for a while, the skin begins to warm a little." The physicians immediately leaned closer to the infant. The head doctor nodded slowly. "That matches the monitor readings. The prince's body temperature has increased slightly since the contact began." The healer looked up at the king with growing amazement. "Your Majesty, the child metabolism is recovering. The cells are responding as if they are receiving a life signal." The king's eyes darkened with deep thought. He studied Emily for several silent moments before speaking again. "Then we will allow the process to continue. No one will interfere with her contact." Several nobles shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke against the order. Lucian Voss continued with quiet authority. Increase monitoring of the prince's vital signs and record every change. If the girl presence keeps my son alive, then we will learn. Exactly why. Emily looked down again at the small child lying on the bed. Prince Adrian's tiny fingers still held onto her own with surprising determination. The monitor beside them continued its steady rhythm. And for the first time since the crisis had begun, the doctors of the vampire court realized the prince was not only alive, but slowly growing stronger with every passing minute that the human girl remained by his side. The steady rhythm of the monitor continued to fill the chamber as the rain outside grew louder against the tall windows of the Voss estate. Several hours had passed since Emily Carter first touched the hand of Prince Adrian Voss, yet no one in the room dared to relax. The doctors remained gathered around the bed, carefully watching every change on the medical displays. The thin green line on the monitor continued to move with quiet consistency, proof that the infant prince was still alive. Emily's arms had begun to ache from holding the same position for so long, but she did not move. Her fingers remained wrapped gently around the tiny hand of the child. The warmth she had mentioned earlier had slowly increased. The infant's skin no longer felt cold and lifeless. Instead, it carried the faint warmth of a living body struggling to recover. The head physician studied the readings again with growing fascination. Your Majesty, the prince's heart rhythm continues to strengthen. The recovery is slow but consistent. This level of stability should not be possible after complete cardiac failure. Another healer leaned over the small bed and carefully listened to the infant breathing. The lungs are functioning better as well. Each breath is slightly deeper than the last. The prince's body appears to be repairing itself. Several vampire nobles standing near the back of the chamber exchanged uneasy glances. One of them stepped forward cautiously. Your Majesty, this situation is unnatural. Humans have never shown the ability to influence vampire biology in this way. If the girl carries some unknown power, it could present a danger to the royal bloodline. Emily felt her stomach tighten when she heard those words. She quickly shook her head without lifting her hand from the prince. I promise I do not have any power. I work at a bakery in the town. My life is very normal. I deliver bread. I take care of my grandmother. That is all. The noble did not look convinced. He turned toward the king again. Your Majesty, even if the girl means no harm, we must understand what she is. The safety of the prince must come first. Before the discussion could continue, one of the younger physicians suddenly gasped softly. Everyone in the room turned toward the bed. Prince Adrian's tiny fingers had moved again. The small hand that was holding Emily's finger tightened slightly, as if the child was trying to grip her more firmly. The head doctor quickly checked the monitor. The prince's heart rate has increased again. The reaction happened the moment the child moved his hand. Emily looked down in surprise. The infant eyelids fluttered faintly for a brief second before becoming still again. The movement was small but unmistakable. The prince is responding to her presence, even while unconscious, the healer said quietly. The king stepped closer to the bed and studied his son with careful attention. The faint color that had begun to return to the infant cheeks was now more visible than before. The child's breathing remained fragile but steady. Lucian Voss then shifted his gaze toward the wall behind the bed. Ancient symbols carved into the stone surface were part of the old protective wards of the Voss bloodline. The symbols have been silent for centuries, yet now several of the markings have begun to glow faintly with a soft crimson light. One of the elder healers noticed the change and spoke with sudden concern. Your Majesty, look at the ward markings. The king followed the direction of the healer gaze. The ancient runes were pulsing slowly with dim light, as if reacting to something inside the chamber. The elder healer moved closer to examine them. These wards only respond to powerful blood connections. They were created long ago to protect the royal line from outside threats. The healer turned back toward the bed with wide eyes. I believe the wards are reacting to the prince's life force returning. Another healer studied the pattern carefully and shook her head. That is not the only thing they are reacting to. The symbols are aligned toward the girl. The entire chamber fell silent once again. Every vampire slowly turned their attention toward Emily Carter. She stood beside the bed exactly as she had for hours, a simple human girl in a rain-soaked jacket holding the tiny hand of the most powerful child in the vampire world. The glowing runes along the wall continued to pulse faintly in her direction. The elder healer spoke again with quiet disbelief. The ancient wards recognize her presence. That should not be possible unless the girl is connected to the royal bloodline in some way. Emily's heart pounded as the realization spread through the room. She had arrived at the mansion as a bakery delivery worker. Now, even the ancient magic protecting the Vampire King family had begun to react to her existence. The faint crimson glow of the ancient ward symbols continued to pulse softly along the stone wall behind the bed. The light was subtle but unmistakable, and every vampire in the chamber could see it clearly now. The protective magic of the Voss bloodline had awakened after centuries of silence, and it was reacting to the presence of a human girl. The elder healer slowly stepped closer to the glowing runes, his long fingers hovering inches from the ancient carvings. His voice was low and troubled. These wards were created more than 600 years ago. They respond only to royal blood or to threats against the royal bloodline. The healer turned toward the bed where Emily Carter still held the small hand of Prince Adrian. I have never seen them respond to a human before. A tense murmur moved through the group of nobles standing near the far wall. One of them stepped forward, his pale face sharp with suspicion. "Your Majesty, this situation grows more dangerous with every moment. If the wards recognize the girl, then something about her is not ordinary. The safety of the prince must come first." Another noble spoke quickly in agreement. "The girl should be removed from the chamber so the wards can be examined without interference." Emily felt fear tighten in her chest. She did not move her hand from the infant, but her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "If I let go of him, the heartbeat becomes weak again. You all saw it happen. I did not want to hurt him." The head physician immediately confirmed her words. "That is correct. The prince's condition declines every time physical contact stops. Removing the girl right now would place the child at risk." The suspicious noble turned toward the physician with irritation. "Then restrain her hand. Maintain the contact under supervision. We cannot allow an unknown human to stand beside the royal heir without control." Before the argument could continue, a deeper voice cut through the chamber. "That will not happen." The room instantly fell silent. Vampire King Lucian Voss had not raised his voice, yet the authority within those few words stopped every discussion at once. The king stepped forward until he stood beside the bed again. His gaze moved slowly across the nobles who had been speaking. "My son breathes because of her presence. Until we understand the reason, no one will interfere with the only thing keeping him alive." The nobles lowered their heads respectfully, but their expressions remained uneasy. The elder healer looked again toward the glowing ward symbols on the wall. "Your Majesty, if the wards are responding to her presence, there may be an ancient connection we do not yet understand. Perhaps something in her blood carries an echo of the royal line." Emily looked up in confusion. "That is impossible. My family has always lived in the town below the hill. My grandmother raised me there. We have never had anything to do with royalty." The elder healer studied her face carefully as if searching for hidden clues. Sometimes bloodlines travel strange paths across the centuries. History does not always remain where we expect it to stay. At that moment, the monitor beside the bed produced a stronger tone than before. The thin green line climbed slightly higher across the screen. The physician leaned forward again with sudden excitement. "The prince's heart rate has increased once more. It is stronger than it was earlier tonight." Everyone in the room looked toward the infant. Prince Adrian's tiny chest rose with a deeper breath than before. His small fingers tightened again around Emily's hand, as if the child was instinctively holding onto the source of his strength. The king watched the moment in complete silence. Anyone who knew the ancient ruler would have recognized the emotion hidden beneath his calm expression. Relief. But around the chamber, the tension only deepened. The nobles whispered again among themselves. their voices filled with growing concern. One of them spoke quietly to another. If the wards truly recognize her, then the girl may hold a role in the fate of the royal bloodline. That possibility could change everything. The elder healer heard the whisper and nodded slowly. He turned once more toward the king. Your Majesty, the situation may involve forces older than our medical knowledge. Ancient magic sometimes awakens when bloodlines intersect in unexpected ways. The king's eyes returned to Emily Carter. She stood beside the bed with tired arms and frightened eyes, still holding the tiny hand of the infant prince who refused to release her. Outside the mansion, the storm continued to sweep across the dark hills of Vermont. Inside the royal medical chamber, an even greater storm was beginning to form, because the ancient power protecting the vampire throne had recognized the presence of a human girl who should never have been part of the royal destiny. The uneasy whispers among the vampire nobles had not faded when another change suddenly appeared on the monitor beside the bed. The thin green line that represented Prince Adrian's heart rhythm began to dip slightly. The steady pattern that had brought relief to the chamber only moments earlier was now weakening again. The head physician leaned forward immediately and adjusted the settings on the monitor. His expression tightened with concern. The heart rate is dropping again. The room grew tense at once. Emily Carter felt the tiny fingers in her hand grow weaker as well. The infant grip loosened slightly, and the warmth she had felt earlier began to fade from the small skin beneath her fingertips. She looked down in alarm. The baby hand feels colder again. The physician studied the monitor readings quickly. Nothing else has changed. The breathing remains stable, but the heart rhythm is declining. The elder healer turned toward Emily. Are you still maintaining full contact with the prince's skin? Emily nodded quickly. Yes. I have not moved my hand at all. The healer frowned in confusion. Then something else must be affecting the connection. The elder vampire noble who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, his sharp voice cutting through the tension. Your Majesty, this proves the situation is unstable. The girl influence cannot be trusted if the prince's condition continues to change without explanation. The head physician looked up from the monitor with urgency. The prince's heart rhythm is still tied to her presence, but something is interfering with the process. We need to observe what happens if she strengthens the contact. Emily looked at the doctor with uncertainty. Strengthen the contact. What does that mean? The physician gestured toward the infant gently. Instead of touching only his hand, try placing your other hand lightly over the child arm. Sometimes greater surface contact can stabilize biological transfer signals. Emily hesitated for a moment. She looked toward the king, silently asking permission. Lucian Voss gave a single nod. Try it. Slowly, Emily lifted her free hand and carefully placed it against the small arm of Prince Adrian. The infant's skin was cool, but not lifeless. She tried to keep her touch gentle and calm. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then the monitor suddenly produced a stronger tone. The green line jumped upward again, and the heart rhythm returned to a steadier pace. The physician stared at the screen with astonishment. The heart rate is stabilizing again. The elder healer nodded slowly. Increasing the contact improved the connection. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances once more. One of them spoke quietly to another. The prince's body reacts to her presence as if it recognizes her. But that should not be possible. The elder healer moved toward the glowing ward symbols on the wall again. The crimson light within the ancient carvings pulsed slightly brighter now. The healer examined them carefully. The wards are responding more strongly than before. He turned toward the king. Your Majesty, the reaction has intensified. The ancient magic is no longer only acknowledging her presence. It appears to be aligning with it. Emily heard the words and felt a chill move through her chest. I do not understand any of this. I am just trying to help the baby breathe. The physician suddenly leaned over the bed again. Wait. Everyone look at the prince. All eyes moved toward the infant at once. Prince Adrian's eyelids fluttered again, this time more noticeably than before. The small movement lasted only a second, but it was clear enough for everyone to see. The child's tiny mouth moved slightly, as if he was trying to form a weak breath or sound. The physician looked up with amazement. The prince is attempting to wake. That reaction should not occur while he is still in recovery from cardiac failure. The elder healer spoke softly. It is because he senses the source of his strength. The room grew completely silent. Emily felt the infant fingers tighten once more around her own hand, stronger than before. The monitor continued its steady rhythm as the prince breathing deepened slightly. Across the chamber, the vampire nobles watched the scene with growing realization. The infant heir of the Voss bloodline was not only alive because of the human girl standing beside him. He was beginning to respond to her presence as if it were something familiar and essential to his survival. And in that moment, every ancient vampire in the room understood that whatever force connected Emily Carter to the royal child was becoming stronger with every passing minute. The faint movement of Prince Adrian's eyelids left the entire chamber frozen in stunned silence. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The only sound that filled the room was the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and the soft breath of the recovering child. Emily Carter felt the tiny fingers tighten around her hand once again, stronger than they had been before. She looked down at the infant with surprise and relief. "He is moving again," she whispered softly. The head physician leaned forward quickly and checked the monitor readings. The heart rhythm is stabilizing further. His condition continues to improve while she maintains contact. The elder healer studied the glowing ward symbols along the wall with deep concern. The crimson light within the ancient carvings had grown brighter, pulsing slowly in harmony with the rhythm of the prince's heart. "This is no longer a simple medical recovery," the healer said quietly. "Something deeper is unfolding here." The vampire nobles standing along the far side of the chamber grew increasingly restless. One of them stepped forward with clear frustration in his voice. "Your Majesty, we cannot continue to ignore the risk. The ancient wards are reacting to the girl. The prince's condition depends entirely on her presence. If she leaves the estate, the royal heir may fall into danger again." Another noble spoke in agreement. "And if she stays within the royal household, she becomes a vulnerability that enemies could exploit. A human connected to the prince's life force would be a powerful target." Emily listened to their words with growing anxiety. "I never wanted to cause trouble for anyone. I only came here to deliver bread. I did not know anything about vampires or royal families." The suspicious noble looked directly at her. "That may be true, but now the situation has changed. Your presence has become part of the prince's survival. That fact alone makes you important to the fate of this kingdom." The tension inside the chamber continued to rise. The head physician tried to bring the discussion back to the child recovery. "Your Majesty, the prince's condition is still fragile. If the girl becomes distressed or distracted, it could affect the connection. We should reduce unnecessary pressure in this room." The elder healer nodded slowly. "The doctor is correct. The child body appears to respond to calm contact from the girl. Any conflict here may interfere with the recovery." The suspicious noble shook his head with frustration. "We are not discussing a minor inconvenience. The royal heir is now tied to a human stranger whose background we do not understand. The safety of the throne must be protected above all else." The noble turned toward the king with firm determination. "Your Majesty, I respectfully advise that the girl be placed under royal supervision immediately. Her movements should be restricted until we learn the full truth about her bloodline." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "I have done nothing wrong. I just want a baby to get better." The room grew quiet as all attention turned toward the tall figure standing beside the bed. Lucian Voss had listened to every argument without interruption. His ancient gaze moved slowly across the chamber, resting briefly on each noble who had spoken. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. "No one in this room will treat her as a prisoner." The nobles lowered their heads slightly, but the tension remained. The king continued, "This girl is the only reason my son still breathes. Until the truth of this connection is discovered, she will be treated as a protected guest of this house." The suspicious noble hesitated before speaking again. "Your Majesty, If enemies discover that the prince's survival depends on a human girl, they will attempt to capture her. The king's expression remained unchanged. Then the girl will be protected with the same strength that guards my own blood. The chamber fell silent once more. Emily looked down at the infant prince, who still held her finger with surprising determination. The child breathing remained steady and calm. Around the room, the vampire nobles exchanged worried glances, realizing that the king's decision had changed the course of events. The human girl who had arrived at the estate as a simple delivery worker was no longer an outsider who could quietly return home. From this moment forward, Emily Carter had become part of the royal household of the Voss bloodline, because the life of the vampire prince now depended on her presence. The chamber remained tense even after the king's decision. The vampire nobles had fallen silent, but the unease among them had not disappeared. Outside the tall windows, the storm over the Vermont hills had begun to fade, leaving the night sky dark and still. Inside the royal medical chamber, the attention of every healer remained focused on the small bed where Prince Adrian Voss continued to breathe quietly. Emily Carter was still standing beside him, with both hands gently resting against the child's arm and hand. The infant grip around her finger had not weakened again. Instead, the tiny hold seemed steady and calm, as if the prince had settled into the warmth of her presence. The head physician studied the monitor carefully for several moments before speaking again. "Your Majesty, the prince's heart rhythm has become more consistent during the past several minutes. The recovery pattern is slow but stable. That is the strongest improvement we have observed since the crisis began." The elder healer nodded in agreement. The child body appears to recognize her presence as a stabilizing force. If this continues, the prince may regain full strength sooner than we expected. The suspicious noble who had spoken earlier remained uneasy. "Your Majesty, even if the child recovers, we still face the same problem. The prince's life now appears to be tied to the girl. If she leaves the estate, the bond may weaken." Lucian Voss looked down at his son for several seconds before answering. "Then she will not leave." The simple statement filled the chamber with quiet shock. Emily lifted her head slightly in surprise. "Your Majesty, I have a job in town. My grandmother depends on me to help take care of the house. I did not plan to stay here." The king's eyes moved toward her calmly. "That situation will be resolved. The needs of the royal heir must come first." The elder healer stepped forward respectfully. "Your Majesty, if the connection between the prince and the girl remains active, it may be wise to keep them close until we understand the nature of the bond. Distance could disrupt the recovery." The king nodded slightly. "That is my intention." He turned toward the nobles standing along the far wall. "From this moment forward, Emily Carter will remain within the protection of the Voss estate. She will be provided with safe lodging and anything she requires while my son recovers." The suspicious noble frowned, but did not challenge the command directly. "Your Majesty, such protection may attract attention from rival clans. If other vampires learn that a human girl holds influence over the prince's survival, they may attempt to exploit the situation." The king's expression remained cold and controlled. "Then they will learn the consequences of interfering with my household." The quiet certainty in his voice ended the discussion immediately. Emily looked down again at the infant prince. The child's breathing had become smoother now, and the faint color in his cheeks continued to grow stronger. She felt the tiny fingers shift slightly around her own hand, as if the baby recognized her presence. "I still do not understand why he reacts to me," she said softly. The elder healer studied her with thoughtful eyes. "Sometimes ancient bloodlines remember connections long forgotten by history. There may be something in your ancestry that we have not yet discovered." Emily shook her head slowly. "My family has never spoken about anything like that. We have always been ordinary people." The healer answered quietly. "History has a way of hiding its secrets until the right moment arrives." At that moment, the infant prince made another small movement. His eyelids fluttered again, and this time his tiny hand tightened around Emily's finger with clear strength. The monitor responded with a slightly stronger rhythm. The physician smiled faintly with relief. "The prince continues to improve. Around the chamber, the tension slowly eased as the healers realized the child condition was no longer declining. Yet the atmosphere remained heavy with unanswered questions. The king watched the small scene beside the bed with deep focus. His son's life had been saved by a human girl who had walked into the estate by accident. And now the fate of the Voss bloodline had become intertwined with Emily Carter in a way that none of them yet understood. The quiet recovery of Prince Adrian Voss continued through the late hours of the night. The storm outside the mansion had finally passed, leaving the dark sky above the Vermont hills calm and silent. Inside the royal medical chamber, the healers worked carefully around the small bed while Emily Carter remained beside the child, still maintaining gentle contact with his hand and arm. The infant breathing had grown steadier with each passing minute, and the faint warmth in his skin had returned almost completely. The head physician checked the monitor once more and spoke with cautious relief. "Your Majesty, the prince's condition has stabilized beyond our expectations. His heart rhythm now resembles that of a healthy infant vampire. The danger has not fully passed, but the immediate crisis appears to be ending." A quiet wave of relief moved through the chamber. Several of the healers stepped back slightly from the bed, their tense expressions softening for the first time since the emergency began. Emily let out a small breath she did not realize she had been holding. "I'm glad he is getting stronger. The child deserves to grow up safely." The elder healer studied her thoughtfully. "It appears the prince has chosen you as the source of his strength. That kind of connection does not occur by accident." Emily shook her head gently. "I still believe it must be some strange coincidence. I have never done anything special in my life." The elder healer did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward a large cabinet near the wall where several ancient books were kept. These volumes contained records of vampire history and the older forms of magic that existed long before modern medicine. The healer removed one heavy book and opened it carefully across a nearby table. The pages were filled with faded writing and symbols that had been preserved for centuries. The healer began turning the pages slowly while speaking in a thoughtful voice. Throughout history, there have been rare moments when a human and a vampire life force become connected. Such events are extremely uncommon and usually involve ancient bloodlines or forgotten magical bonds. One of the younger physicians stepped closer to examine the book. "Are you suggesting the girl may carry some ancient lineage connected to the royal family?" The elder healer turned another page and studied a set of symbols drawn in dark ink. That possibility must now be considered. The ancient wards recognized her presence, and the prince's life responded to her touch in a way that defies ordinary biology. Those signs point toward a deeper connection. Emily listened quietly while still, holding the infant hand. "My grandmother once mentioned that our family came from immigrants who settled in this region many generations ago, but she never spoke about anything unusual beyond that." The elder healer nodded slowly. Many bloodlines carry hidden stories that are forgotten as centuries pass. The king stepped closer to the table and looked down at the open book. "What does the record say about these rare connections?" The healer pointed to a faded passage written in old language. The text describes a phenomenon called the life-bound resonance. It occurs when the life force of a vulnerable vampire child becomes linked to a human who carries compatible blood energy. In such cases, the human presence strengthens the child body during moments of extreme weakness. The physician's eyes widened slightly. "That matches exactly what we have observed tonight." The healer continued reading quietly. The record also states that this connection often reveals a hidden bond between families that existed long before the present generation. Lucian Voss looked toward Emily Carter again. The possibility of an ancient link between her bloodline and his own now seemed far less impossible than it had only hours earlier. Emily felt uneasy hearing the discussion, but she remained focused on the small child beside her. Prince Adrian's fingers still held her hand with calm determination. The monitor beside the bed continued its steady rhythm as the infant breathing remained peaceful. The elder healer closed the ancient book carefully and spoke with quiet certainty. "Your Majesty, the evidence suggests that the girl presence is not random. Her bloodline may carry a forgotten connection to the royal house of Voss. If that is true, then tonight may not have been an accident at all. It may have been a moment when an ancient bond finally awakened again. The ancient book rested open on the wooden table while the royal medical chamber remained quiet. The words spoken by the elder healer had changed the atmosphere of the entire room. What had begun as a medical emergency now felt like the awakening of something far older and far more mysterious. Emily Carter stood beside the bed with tired arms, still holding the small hand of Prince Adrian Voss. The infant breathing remained steady and calm. The warmth in his skin had fully returned, and the faint color in his cheeks now looked healthy instead of pale. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the chamber like a quiet promise that the child would survive the night. Yet the conversation about ancient bloodlines left Emily deeply unsettled. "I still do not understand how any of this could involve my family," she said softly. "My grandmother always told me our ancestors were simple settlers who arrived in this region many generations ago. We never had anything to do with kings or ancient magic." The elder healer closed the heavy book gently and looked at her with thoughtful eyes. History often hides its most important truths within ordinary lives. Sometimes a powerful bloodline passes quietly through the centuries without anyone realizing what it carries. One of the younger physicians stepped closer to the bed and checked the infant breathing again. "The prince's condition continues to improve. If the connection remains stable, he may fully recover by tomorrow." The physician looked toward Emily. However, the bond between them may not disappear when the child regains strength. The elder healer nodded slowly. "That is correct. Life-bound resonance does not vanish easily. Once such a bond awakens, it often continues to exist long after the original crisis has passed." The suspicious noble, standing near the far wall, crossed his arms. "If that is true, then the girl will remain tied to the royal bloodline for the rest of the prince's life." The thought clearly disturbed him. "Your Majesty, such a connection will draw the attention of every rival clan in the region." Lucian Voss stood quietly beside the bed as he listened to the discussion. His eyes remained fixed on his son while the child slept peacefully beneath the soft light of the chamber. The king finally spoke in a calm but serious voice. "If enemies seek to exploit this bond, they will face the full strength of the Voss house." The noble bowed his head slightly, but continued speaking. "Your Majesty, the danger may not only come from outside enemies. If the bond truly exists, then the girl herself becomes part of the royal bloodline future. Her safety and loyalty must be guaranteed." Emily looked up in alarm. "I do not want to be involved in any political conflict. I only want the child to grow strong again." The elder healer stepped closer to her. "The truth is that your life may have already changed. The moment you touched the prince and restored his heartbeat, the ancient wards recognized your presence. That kind of recognition is rarely temporary." Emily lowered her gaze toward the infant prince who still held her finger. The child breathing remained peaceful and calm, as if the storm that had threatened his life earlier that night had never existed. "I never expected my life to lead to something like this," she whispered quietly. The elder healer placed the ancient book back inside the cabinet and turned toward the king. "Your Majesty, we should begin investigating the girl ancestry immediately. Records from earlier centuries may reveal a connection between her family and the royal line." Lucian Voss gave a slow nod. "That search will begin at once. Emily Carter will remain under my protection until the truth is discovered." The chamber grew quiet again as the reality of the situation settled over everyone present. Only a few hours earlier, Emily had been a simple bakery delivery worker walking through the rain toward the estate kitchens. Now she stood beside the bed of the vampire prince whose life had been saved by her touch. The infant fingers tightened slightly around her hand once more, as if confirming the invisible bond that had formed between them. And in that silent moment, the members of the royal court began to understand that the fate of the Voss bloodline had become forever connected to the ordinary human girl who had unknowingly awakened an ancient power. The long night inside the Voss estate slowly moved toward the quiet hours before dawn. The storm had completely disappeared, and a faint silver light from the moon now touched the tall windows of the royal medical chamber. Most of the physicians had stepped back from the bed after confirming that Prince Adrian Voss' condition had stabilized. The steady rhythm of the monitor continued without interruption, and the infant breathing remained calm and peaceful. Emily Carter was still beside the bed, her hands gently resting against the child's small arm and fingers. Hours of standing in the same position had made her shoulders sore and her eyelids heavy, yet she refused to move. Each time she felt the tiny grip of the prince tighten slightly around her finger, a quiet sense of responsibility filled her chest. The child trusted her presence, even though he was still too young to understand it. The elder healer observed the scene quietly. From across the room, after several minutes, he approached the bed and spoke in a calm voice. The prince's strength continues to grow. You may ease your hand slightly now if you wish. The danger has passed for the moment. Emily looked down at the infant and carefully reduced the pressure of her touch without fully letting go. The child breathing did not change. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. She released a small breath of relief. I was afraid that if I moved even a little he might grow weak again. The head physician smiled gently. The bond between you and the prince appears stable now. Your presence has helped his body remember how to fight again. Emily's eyes softened as she watched the sleeping child. I'm glad he will have the chance to grow up. No baby deserves to face danger so early in life. At the far side of the chamber, Lucian Voss remained standing beside the window, watching the quiet landscape outside. The ancient king had spoken very little during the past hour, but his attention had never left the bed where his son rested. Finally, he turned and approached slowly. His presence brought immediate silence to the room. The king looked down at the infant for a long moment before speaking quietly. The healers say he will survive because of you. Emily felt nervous under the king's gaze, but she answered honestly. I did not do anything special. I only held his hand because he looked so small and alone. The king studied her expression carefully, as if measuring the truth behind her words. Many creatures claim loyalty and kindness when they stand before power. Very few show it when they believe no one is watching. Emily did not know how to respond to that. She simply looked down at the baby again. Prince Adrian shifted slightly in his sleep and tightened his fingers around hers once more. The king's eyes followed the small movement. For centuries, Lucian Voss had ruled his people with strength and distance, rarely allowing emotion to appear before others. Yet in this quiet moment, something different passed across his face. A father watching his child breathe again. The king spoke again with calm certainty. You saved the life of my son tonight. That debt will not be forgotten. Emily shook her head gently. I did not save him alone. The doctors and healers worked all night to help him recover. The king's voice remained steady. They tried to help him live. You gave him the strength to do so. The elder healer stepped closer with quiet respect. Your Majesty, if the girl continues to remain near the prince during the coming days, his recovery will likely become complete. The king nodded once. That arrangement will continue. Emily Carter will remain within the protection of this estate as long as the bond remains active. Emily felt both relief and uncertainty when she heard those words. Her simple life in the small town below the hill suddenly felt very far away. Yet when she looked at the sleeping child beside her, she knew she could not simply walk away while he still needed her presence. The chamber remained quiet as the first faint light of morning touched the horizon outside. The prince's breathing stayed strong and steady. And in that peaceful moment, it became clear to everyone in the room that the night, which had almost ended the royal bloodline, had instead created an unexpected connection between the vampire throne and the human girl who had arrived, carrying nothing more than a box of bread. Morning light slowly filled the royal medical chamber as the first rays of sunlight touched the distant hills beyond the Voss estate. The long night that had nearly taken the life of Prince Adrian Voss had finally ended. The steady sound of the heart monitor continued without interruption, its quiet rhythm now strong and confident. The physicians moved calmly around the room as they completed their final examinations. One of them looked up at the king with clear relief in his voice. Your Majesty, the prince's condition is now completely stable. His heart rhythm is healthy and his breathing is strong. There are no signs of weakness remaining. A quiet sense of peace moved through the chamber. Emily Carter felt the tiny hand of the infant prince still wrapped around her finger, but the grip no longer carried the desperate weakness it had earlier in the night. Instead, the hold felt calm and warm, like a child simply resting in comfort. The head physician smiled gently. You may release his hand now if you wish. The bond will remain, but the prince no longer depends on constant contact to live. Emily hesitated for a moment before, slowly easing her fingers away from the child hand. For the first time since the crisis began, the infant remained perfectly stable without her touch. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Prince Adrian shifted slightly in his sleep and let out a soft breath before settling again beneath the blankets. Emily felt a wave of relief spread through her chest. The child was truly safe now. Across the room, the elder healer closed the ancient book and spoke with quiet certainty. The bond between them has fulfilled its purpose. The life-bound resonance awakened to protect the prince during his moment of greatest danger. Now that his strength has returned, the connection will remain gentle rather than urgent. Lucian Voss stepped closer to the bed and looked down at his son. For several silent seconds, the powerful king simply watched the peaceful rise and fall of the infant chest. Then he turned toward Emily Carter. The ancient ruler who commanded the loyalty of countless vampires spoke with calm gratitude. My son lives because of you. That truth will always be remembered by the House of Voss. Emily lowered her head slightly, still feeling overwhelmed by everything that had happened during the night. I only did what anyone would do if they saw a child in danger. The king's eyes studied her carefully. Not everyone would have shown the same courage in a room full of strangers and ancient creatures. The elder healer stepped forward once more. Your Majesty, the historical record suggests that the bond between the girl family and the royal bloodline may reach back many centuries. It would be wise to explore that history when time allows. Lucian Voss nodded slowly. That investigation will begin. But for now, the most important matter has been resolved. The king then looked toward Emily again. You are free to return to your home in the town below the hill, if you wish. However, the doors of this estate will always remain open to you. Emily looked down at the sleeping prince once more. His tiny chest rose and fell with peaceful rhythm, completely unaware of how close he had come to death during the night. She smiled softly. I am glad he will have the chance to grow up and see the world. The king answered quietly, and when he does, he will know the name of the woman who saved his life. The morning sun climbed higher above the mountains as the members of the royal court slowly left the chamber. The crisis had passed. The vampire prince would live, and the story of the ordinary human girl who walked into the Voss estate carrying a simple box of bread would remain forever written in the history of the royal bloodline. A reminder that even the most ancient power in the world can sometimes be saved by the quiet kindness of a single human hand.